Academica Media. You are listening to Charter School Superstars, bringing you the voices of an education revolution.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Ryan Kairalla from Doral College. And our guests this week are prominent music educators and the creators of the Songwriting for Music Educators books and courses. They have taught music and songwriting and created music curriculum for the secondary and collegiate levels. And you can find out more about their work by visiting www.fflatbooks.com. We are happy to welcome Dr. Kat Reinhert and Dr. Sarah Gulish onto Charter School Superstars. Hello, doctors. How you guys doing?
I'm great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It is my pleasure to have you. We've been doing this program now we're in the triple digits now, like definitely over 100 episodes at this point. We've been going at it for about 3 years now. And to my knowledge, I don't think we've had any music educators yet. And that is unacceptable. That is a huge blind spot for us because music education, so important, a big part of my own life as a student, a big part of what a lot of our charter schools do. And, you know, it's a need that we need to fill. And boy, did we fill it with two very, very terrific music educators here. So I'm excited for this one. And what I think is interesting about your approach to music pedagogy is your emphasis in particular on songwriting in music curriculum. Because I took lots of music classes in school, but I've never had a teacher come to me and say, hey, I'm going to teach you how to write a song. It's always been, circle of fifths and, plagal cadences and everything, but nobody ever said, I'd like to hear the song you want to write, Ryan, and that's probably a good thing. But let me ask you guys this. Why should music educators be emphasizing songwriting in particular as part of their music curriculum? Kat, let me ask you that question.
I mean, it's a great question. And I think, Sarah and I have talked a lot about this, and it's really about engaging the students and their interests and finding out where they're coming from and understanding more about who they are as people. And also songwriting provides a space for students to express emotions and feelings and, work through things that they're dealing with in life. And I think coming out of this pandemic, we're still kind of in it, but there's a lot of stuff and processing that we notice in our students that is going on, and songwriting provides a platform for them to explore that in a way that is different than just talking to your counselor or talking to your friends. It really can help heal students. And so I think that those are reasons, and, others just like student-centered learning and really getting to the core of engaging with student autonomy and allowing students a lot of freedom in their learning.
Kat, I'm glad you brought up the therapeutic aspect of songwriting in the sense that given everything that schools are going through, that students are going through right now amid this pandemic, activities like songwriting, I would imagine, can really help students process their emotions. And I contrast that with the impulse that a lot of schools have right now as budgets get tighter, as things get more stressful, as we're more worried about this quote-unquote COVID slide in student learning, that schools want to kind of really double down on core subjects right now and, maybe have a lot of elective courses, a lot of arts courses fall by the wayside. And as a huge proponent of arts education myself, I would not support that, but I can understand schools having that impulse. Can you talk a little bit, Kat, about how schools can sort of navigate that balance and why it's still important to emphasize the arts and emphasize songwriting even during crisis times like this?
Yeah, I'm actually going to pass this to Sarah because she's working in the kind of spaces that you're talking about. So I'm gonna pass this question to you.
Oh, right on.
Let's go, Sarah. I have it, Kat. Yeah. So I'm a public school educator. I teach high school, and I think at some point in music education history, we became more about replication than creation. And so everything that you described, Ryan, we see that in school music programs. Embedded in school music programs is training students to be really good at replicating a certain canon of music that we've decided is the best, when what we see in our music industry is musicians who are creating, and that creation is what our students consume. So there's kind of that disconnect between what's happening in industry and what's happening in school. And what you're talking about with, budget cuts and refocusing, I think part of the problem, honestly, is that we have not made a good enough case for the arts and how valuable it is. And I think part of that can be tied to that cycle of saying that this is what music education is. So people who are in power aren't seeing that social emotional learning piece as it is connected to the arts. And so I think it's in somewhat an advocacy issue in how we're positioning the arts.
I completely agree with that. And I have really been celebrating a lot of the charter schools that have not only refused to let arts education fall by the wayside amid the pandemic, but have often doubled down on arts education. If now is when we need it more than ever for students to help process these feelings and to just make school a valuable experience, and to not lose the pedagogical benefits of arts education and music education that bleed into other subject areas, the boosting of critical thinking skills, of self-confidence, of analytical reasoning, mathematical reasoning. I mean, you all as music educator experts are no stranger to those benefits, so I know you're with me on it. Let's steer this back to this idea of teaching songwriting in music classes, because I'm pretty fascinated by this. And Kat, since you passed the ball to Sarah, I'm gonna give this one to Sarah as well, just to kind of keep that going. Sarah, let me ask you this from the K-12 perspective. Let's say we have a music teacher out there who is buying what you're selling, is like, absolutely, I definitely see the merit in teaching songwriting as part of music curriculum, but they also might say, while I am a competent music educator, I have all the credentials and I'm great at teaching music, I know the plagal cadences and the circle of fifths, I'm not a songwriter. I don't have that background. What would you say to those teachers in terms of, can they still teach songwriting and teach some of those principles even though they don't have that background themselves?
Ryan, you are describing every teacher we've worked with in the past couple of years.
All right.
Yeah, I think because in our teacher preparation programs, there is also no emphasis on songwriting. So unless you're doing it outside of school, you're probably not being encouraged to write songs. You're probably being encouraged to be the best violinist or the best choral conductor, right? And so we see this all the time. And, I have to also acknowledge Kat, because this is a lot of her philosophy too, is that we tell those people you have to start by being a songwriter yourself. And so you can absolutely teach songwriting to students, but to neglect your own personal creativity would be a huge miss. And I think a lot of these educators are scared, right? Because they've never done it before. And so there's a learning curve. So we encourage all of the teachers that we work with to really embrace that beginner's mindset. And part of, our book and our course is all really training them how to become songwriters themselves to then teach it. So I think it's twofold. They need the tools to facilitate that learning, but then they also need to be doing it themselves.
Yeah, and to that point too, there's just a lot of stuff that goes on when you write a song that isn't about the writing of the song. It's like you can construct a song that has a certain rhyme scheme and a certain form and it follows certain chords, but there's all the creativity aspects behind it and the barriers and resistances that, I don't think it's good, or, this doesn't work, and all those kinds of things they're kind of, they call them like hidden curriculum things. They're like the hidden things that are going on in the processing of writing, that when you start to write, you have much more empathy for the students who are also struggling with those same things. And because if you've written a song or 10 songs or something like that, when you're working with your students and they're struggling with, you're like, oh my gosh, I recognize this. I felt this when I was writing X song, and so we're also talking about the importance of the doing in order to, to really access all of the parts of what it is to be and write songs.
Is the main pedagogical benefit of teaching songwriting this idea of kind of learning by doing? Like, a great way to learn a lot of the musical principles that are taught in music class is to have a kid actually write a song themselves, in the same way that like a great way to have a student learn how to make a birdhouse is to, like in shop class, is to actually make the birdhouse as opposed to reading books about how other people made birdhouses? Is that sort of the main pedagogical goal that this area of the curriculum is exploring? Or is it that songwriting in itself is just inherently a skill that we want to be teaching alongside the rest of the music curriculum? Or is it kind of a little bit of both?
I mean, I really think it's both. It's not either or. It's not a black or white situation. It's really gray. And depending on what the teacher is working on or wants to address in a classroom, songwriting could be a lens through which you teach that, but it could also just be its own thing of just, we're going to just write, to this prompt or to this brief, or we're going to try to do this, or, we want you to kind of think about X, Y, or Z. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but it could be both, or it could be one or the other. I mean, that's the beauty of it. I think it's so open-ended and it leaves so much room for creativity. And I know Sarah does a lot of this even with her orchestra class. She does a lot of, improvisation and composition and songwriting essentially with her orchestra. And that's something I always like, wow, I want to come see this, and so, because we live in different cities. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think
it's tremendous.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you have listeners who are coming from the admin side of things, and part of our national standards are creating in music. And there's been some research done surveying administrators and surveying school principals about what types of actions are happening in music class, and we don't see a lot of creating happen. So it's not just that we're using it to get as a means to an end to other higher musical skills. The creating in and of itself should be embedded in what it means to be musical and be a musician. That could be composing, that could be improvising. We just happen to be really excited about songwriting, and so that's what we wrote a book about.
I'm excited about emphasizing that piece of it as well for this reason. I'm going to take off my educator hat here and do something I rarely do on this program, which is put on my entertainment lawyer, entertainment industry hat, which is a actually different podcast that I host. But since I have a couple musicians here, I want to just take this little point of personal privilege here and talk about the fact that in the modern music industry, the way it exists now, there is a lot more value to today's creators in musicians in creating works as opposed to performing works, which has been further accelerated by the COVID pandemic and the fact that there are not as many venues to play in anymore, and it's not safe to play in venues. So a lot of my musician clients in my legal practice are getting an increasing concentration of their income coming from copyrights, from the songs they write and the royalties that are coming from that. And so if we're not teaching the next generation of musicians not only to create great songs, but to create them with some degree of efficiency and to create lots of songs, because that's sort of what the marketplace is valuing right now, we're really putting that generation of musicians at a disadvantage. So I am excited that you two have identified that this is a big role that music educators need to start playing to make sure that this generation of musicians is ready for that new music industry marketplace that they're getting themselves into. So that's really exciting. All right, taking off my music business hat, putting on my educator hat again, because I got to remember what podcast I'm hosting right now. That's really, really great. Let's bring it to let's continue this thread of songwriting in schools. I want to see if I can get a little preview of some of your materials here. This Songwriting for Music Educators course that you have coming out, that I believe you have coming out next month in October. Pretty excited for that. Can I get from each of you one best practice in teaching songwriting from that book? Maybe your favorite one that you could share with the listeners. We'll start with you, Kat.
Ooh, wow, the first one that came to mind was probably the very first part that we take the music educator through, which is a personal inventory of their creativity and musicianship, and kind of examining who they are and where they feel they might get stuck, or things that kind of stop them or have stopped them from creating. And sometimes it's someone that told them that's not the way you do it. Sometimes it's a belief that isn't true about themselves. Like you mentioned at the beginning, how well, I'm a musician, but I don't do that, and it's, in talking about the beginner's mindset and really engaging the person who's moving through our course in that first, as like that is the first part of, you know, figuring out this thing called songwriting. And we want to instill that not only in them, but also that's something they can do with their students, because their students, I mean, some of them, a lot of them will not become musicians, and that's not the point. The point is that they will have something that they could take with them through their entire life that brings them joy, that they can come to after they're finished with maybe a hard day doing something that they love, but it's not as creative, and they can sit down with an instrument or with a DAW and create and just do it for fun, you know. And so it's that exploration of that. Sarah?
Yeah, I love that emphasis on the person, and this kind of ties into what I would say I think is a best practice. We see in education a lot of copy and paste, and we see that a lot in music education, right? Where teachers want you to copy and paste lesson plans. Tell me exactly how to do this in my class for my students. And our answer is always, we can't, because we don't know your students. We don't know their population. We don't know their past histories. And so I think one of the strengths in this course is we really guide teachers through the creative thought process of developing lesson plans, pitches, assessment materials. So it's not laid out for you how you should exactly do it. What is laid out is the thought process of how you develop those materials. And I think that's a best practice that we should be embracing in all of our subject areas.
That's really, really great. I'm so excited for these materials. I want to voraciously consume them as soon as they come out next month. And you do have a book already, Songwriting for Music Educators, that people can get at fflatbooks.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Correct.
if
Yep.
people want kind of a preview of some of the material there, they can find it there. Again, that's fflatbooks.com. And if you get why that company name is adorable and hilarious, then you had a good music teacher and you should thank them.
It took me 6 months.
So I have to give a shout out. It's my company, and my brother came up with the name, so I always have to give him a shout out for that name.
I love that. No, shout out to your brother.
Yeah.
So great stuff. Thank you both for all that you do to keep alive and to keep in importance this really valuable discipline, which in my own life, even though I am not a professional musician, has played a big role in just developing me as a human being. And a lot of the lessons I learned in music, as you noted, Kat, I have taken into my other professions with some degree of success. And so I'm grateful for the music teachers I've had. And I imagine there are lots of music teachers out there who are grateful for the work that you guys will be doing. Let me ask you both our final question before we let you go this week. I'll direct this one to Sarah first. If with the snap of your fingers you could make any change to the education system, what change would it be?
I think it's going to be a bit generalized, but I think I would embed creativity and collaboration into everything that students do, emphasizing that personal growth and development, how they work with others and how they work within themselves. That's what I would do.
I love that. Kat, same question.
Sarah, that's such a great answer. Fair.
I know. It's always tough when
I
you have to
think-
go second.
You know, it's good. I think I would start with the teachers themselves and have and this is specifically about music education, but you know, encouraging that creativity from the teachers and asking them to do those things, and I think, and really asking them to do the things that they're teaching, because I see a lot of teachers that are, you know, they're not necessarily doing the thing that they're teaching, and so they don't understand all of the practices that go on with whatever art form they're doing. And I know it's not possible to learn everything, like that's not possible, but you know, to have some experience with whatever they're teaching, so it's not just reading out of a book. It's they've had that lived experience of doing something that they're because the students know, you know, they can tell, you know, that they've had that kind of experience with that. So I think I would love to see more doing and more creativity in the teacher education part of that, which would then, you know, filter down into the students.
No argument here. I love learning by doing, project-based learning. Maybe that's why I love music education so much, because there's something inherently project-based learning about it, especially if you're teaching songwriting. I love it. Our guests this week have been Dr. Kat Reinhert and Dr. Sarah Gulish. Find out more about their work by visiting www.fflatbooks.com. Kat, Sarah, it has been a treat. Thank you so much for being on the program this week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you all for listening to Charter School Superstars.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.